Welcome to the Ncast. I'm Rafael DeLeon, Senior Vice President of Industry Engagement at Ncontracts. And here's a number worth sitting with. Ncontracts holds customer and vendor data for more than 5,000 financial organizations across the country. And that's not an abstraction. That's real institutions, real customers, real exposure, writing on how well we protect it. And here's why this conversation matters right now. Not in some general cybersecurity is important kind of way. Community banks and credit unions and any financial institutions are being asked to adopt AI faster than their security programs to mature. Threat actors are also moving faster than patch cycles. And when a breach happens, it's rarely institutions that got hacked directly, it's a vendor. That means the security posture of companies like ours isn't a back office, concern anymore. It's frontline risk for every institution that trusts us with their data. So today I want to talk to that person actually responsible for that in contracts. Clay Carter is our Chief Information Security Officer. He spent nearly 20 years building security programs at scale before this at Nielsen, GE, and Xylem, companies that look nothing like a fintech vendor to community banks. That outside perspective is exactly why this conversation is useful. He's not reciting compliance language. He's telling you what security actually looks like when you're the one that has to make it work. Clay, welcome to the Ncast.
Thanks, Rafael. Thanks for having me.
Welcome. So you build security programs at companies that look very different from each other. What's the through line and how you approach security regardless of where you are?
Sure. So, in my opinion, security really doesn't matter what logos on the building or what vertical you're a part of. People still experience risk. They click on things they shouldn't. There's systems that talk to each other in ways that hasn't been mapped out, and the bad guys still look for ways to get in and ways to achieve actions on their objectives. And so that part never changes. What's been kind of the real connecting tissue for me is it's about data and it's about achieving business objectives. And so at every company that I've had the opportunity to be a part of, it's about making sure that I understand how the business works, what the outcome is we need to achieve for our customers or our clients and partners, and then making sure that that is protected, that we can be a going concern, that we can serve those clients and customers across our industry and do so in a safe and secure way.
Clay, you hit the nail on the head, and I'm leverage that because as I've been talking to a lot of compliance and risk professionals, that's what I said. It gets around their crown jewels, and their crown jewels is the data. And data, in my mind, and what I've been reading, is really the new oil, in today's technological world. So, with that, you came into financial services from the outside. What did this industry look like from that vantage point, and what surprised you about how security is approached here compared to other places that you've been?
It's been a really interesting transition. I started my career more years ago than I'd prefer to admit in a financial services company. And so I cut my teeth in tech and security, building software and securing data at Genworth Financial, which is in the life, long-term care, and mortgage business. But it's been 15 years since I've spent a lot of time in the vertical. And from the outside, I was always envious from the other end companies I've been a part of it, what I viewed as probably really, really well-resourced financial companies that had large security teams and blank checks to go and secure their environments. And to some extent, right, at the largest banks around the world, that's true. They have lots of resources. But what I've found at Ncontracts is just like in the water sector, where your local water utility isn't well resourced, like Dominion Power or like the Southern Company, right? Community banks are not resourced nearly to the same extent that I always assumed was true at some of the largest institutions. And so there's still the same challenge at how to protect your data, protect your customers, deliver for your deposit holders, and your partners to be able to do that with the resources you have and to prioritize and optimize those in a way that ensures that you can be a growing and going concern.
Definitely. There's a version of security that's built to satisfy an auditor and a version that's built to stop an attacker. In your experience, how often do these two things actually line up?
I think that Controls are always designed with the best of intentions. However, it's really easy for something to look good on paper, but be impractical or ineffective in practice. And so my philosophy is that I always start with what good security looks like, how to make sure that a process has confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and has a reliable outcome. And then how do I prove that? How do I prove that to the right set of stakeholders, whether that's an insurer, an examiner, an auditor, or my senior management? And so I think it's great when they do line up, but it is often where the best of intentions lead to something that looks good on paper, but may not be practical or secure in practice.
Where do you think those things often fail? When you said when it looks good on paper, is it not that they've done thorough testing of those controls, or what's missing?
I think that, and this is where it cuts both ways. Um, the trick in security, like in many things, is applying the just enough amount of effort to something based on how important it is, how risky it is, how critical it is for it to be intact and to execute without fail. And so often, I think too much emphasis is put on things that aren't particularly important, and not enough emphasis is put on things that are extremely important. And so I see that in practice. I think sometimes the industry that we spend a lot of time in with third-party risk management, I think we over-index a lot on questionnaires because we can't trust each other. We can't find ways to establish trust between each other. In other areas, like say AI, for example, the consumerization of AI has led us to want to really implement that quickly inside companies and institutions. And we're not paying enough attention to the details, like what is that user account I just gave to the AI authorized to do, and what might it choose to do in the best interest of trying to help me accomplish my objective. And so I think it's all about applying the right amount of effort to the problem, and that is a really difficult thing to index on.
Well, I like the way you put that over index the questionnaires, and I want to come back to that if we have time. But looking at the threat landscape, cybersecurity is sitting at the intersection of a lot of things right now: AI, vendor risk, financial services data, and the list could go on and on. What's the cybersecurity environment looking like from where you sit? What concerns you most?
I think the thing that concerns me most is the thing that most CISOs are focused on right now. It's all about velocity. I had a leader tell me once that today is the slowest pace that your life and that technology will ever run at. And I think that's true. And I think sometimes you can't see all the velocity, but it's there and it's only going faster. The complexity and the velocity continue to go up. That makes defending really, really hard. Some of the listeners and viewers might not realize this, but our adversaries, right? The folks that wish to do harm or to capitalize on our institutions by attacking them, they go to work just like we do. Often they have offices, they're well organized, they have relationships and partnerships. They use a lot of the same tools that we do. In fact, PowerShell is the most widely used hacking tool in the world. It was designed for system administrators. The AI that we increasingly are relying on to try to automate and take toil out of our work, that same AI can be used by attackers, and they're not limited by the constraints that we put on it. We intend to make it safe and reproducible and without bias and something that we can rely on operationally. Attackers don't have those constraints. Their goal is to be successful in their objective. It doesn't matter if it's biased. It doesn't matter if it's fair. It's not a game where they have to play by fair rules. And so I think that combined with the velocity, combined with the complexity, it's the classic defender's dilemma, but it's exponentially harder in a world where resources are scarce.
Right.
Talent is scarce, dollars are scarce, focus and attention is scarce. And so that makes the job fun and interesting.
So you really answered my next question, but I want to see if you have anything else to add to it, because you were talking about the bad actors. So these bad actors, these threat actors, have gotten faster, and the time between vulnerability discovery and exploitation keeps shrinking. So what does that mean practically for financial organizations that don't have large security teams?
I very strongly relate to this because, as you know, as our company Ncontracts, right, we intentionally don't run a very large security team because it's not necessary. So it's all about focus. And I think where the focus has to go is to understand where you're at risk and understand how to mitigate that risk as expediently as possible. Where are your levers that you can pull to exercise control and to mitigate threats? It used to be that you had days between when something would come out and be known and something that could be weaponized and then actually actively exploited in the wild. That window's compressed. That is not a new thing. It's been compressing for years, but it's now compressed to the point where often it will not be communicated across the parties in the ecosystem that the risk exists until it's being exploited. And I'm not talking about like true 0-day things. Those certainly still exist and are an issue for us to combat. But just the compression of that down to such a rapid velocity thing. So where do you put your energy? You have to know your environment. That has always been true, and every CISO will tell you have to know your environment. But you have to know it to a degree and a depth that may not have been required before, right? What version of packages are you running in the software that you build? Have you penned to versions, or are you allowing new versions to be brought in as they're published? That's a vector for threat actors, right, through the supply chain. In terms of how you remediate, you have to have levers. And waiting for a patch window once a week is just not sufficient. And so that's where I think we're really fortunate to live in a world where cloud infrastructure and hyperscalers are available to us, and modern techniques to roll and deploy that infrastructure to keep it current and to stay ahead of those risks. In some cases, it's very much an arms race. Something comes out tomorrow, and you have about 6 hours. And so being able to be very operationally focused around that and building the systems, having your team build systems that can survive those events is, I think, the name of the game for defenders.
Right. Well, this is very much like how we're looking at risk. It's not just the one-time thing anymore. It's happening daily. And so the gist of what you were talking about there is really getting down to patch management and having not just a regular cadence, but getting on it very quickly.
I think that's true. And I think the other key is patches are not going to show up when you want them to. In some cases, they may never show up, or if they do, it's far too late. And so understanding what other mitigations you can bring into play is, I think, really, really important. And frankly, not chasing things that aren't relevant. That tail chase is exhausting and will burn out your teams. And so the last thing I'll say, which is just a general public service announcement for anyone listening, if all else fails, you must be good at incident response, right? As a CISO, and I've had the opportunity to take multiple CISO roles now in my career, the first thing that I want to understand is, how do we respond? Who do we rely on? Who can we call for help if we're in over our head? What does that look like? And how do we get much better very quickly? Because every company will experience an event. The question is, are you ready for that event? And have you prepared properly to make that the least painful event that it could be?
It's very similar to how I looked at this as an examiner many years ago. And as you know, the watchword is resilient. How resilient does your institution appear to be? What does that actually look like in practice when it does happen? And what do you learn from that? So whether that's just a cyber event or a natural disaster that impacted your cybersecurity as well, you need to know. And so it really gets down to, and that's been that watchword, resilience.
Completely agree. Resilience is something that I think most leaders are talking about, but you can't emphasize it enough. And resilience should be infused in all aspects of your business. So in complete agreement, resilience is where it's at.
Third party and vendor risk keeps showing up in breach headlines, in almost every headline. Not the institution that's getting hacked directly, but a vendor. And from where you sit, how exposed are most financial organizations to a security failure that they didn't create?
So most breaches that I read about, they start with a sentence like, the institution's systems were not directly compromised. And that is, I think, the heart of the matter. The thing that I think about the most is that the things that can really hurt you are the things that you trust. And so being really clear about, it's important to take risks to do business. It's important to trust our partners and to establish that trust and to give trust when it's earned. But it also, going back to our previous line of conversation, resilience is key, and understanding where that risk lies and how deeply an organization can be damaged by those partners.
And this is where I'll come back to, over-indexing, the questionnaires, because I'd like to talk a little bit about that, because from my perspective, I'm looking at it that with all the class action lawsuits that happen, at least if I've shown the diligence to ask the questions of my vendor, whether they gave me the right answer or not, I'm asking and seeking to understand that. So can you talk about that a little bit more, and how that all intersects with, with what we're seeing with vendors being breached?
Yeah, I think at least from my chair, which I will fully admit I've never been subject to a consent order, although I have had some hairy moments across the companies I've served. To me, it's about trust. And when you flip spreadsheets or questions back and forth, it's not getting to trust. It's doing enough to demonstrate that you asked questions versus getting to real security. And I think that because of the scale and scope of how many vendors that are needed to run our companies, our institutions, it's extremely difficult to do true trust building with all of them, right? It's impossible. In fact, it'd be the wrong use of your time. But for your top 10, you should know who the CISO is at those companies. You should talk to them. You should know who's on their team. You should know how things are going. You should be able to have things like conversations where you've got Chatham House rules and be able to have honest dialogue. To me, that's how you get to trust. And I've had the opportunity to be part of communities across industries where we have those conversations, and it does build trust. I know that if I'm going to go do business with someone at JP Morgan or someone at ServiceNow or someone at Cisco, I know the team that's behind that. And that gives me a lot of confidence. And so my biggest kind of call to action would be take the step and get to know the folks and get to know the programs that you're counting on, because you can push paper. We should do the diligence. I'm not advising not to do diligence, but what I am advising to do is to get to trust. And trust to me is built on relationships and connection.
I think that is key. And again, I'm going to draw from my examiner experience. Those institutions that I had a good rapport with were usually symbolic of a good, strong risk and compliance culture. And you can't start seeing and understanding the culture until you're meeting with them and talking to them. So I hear you saying the same thing. Is that correct?
I think so. One of the biggest successes I feel like I've had in my career is when I was at Xylem. I built security into the critical infrastructure products for the water sector that are deployed all around the world, right, in 250 nations around the world. What made that so successful for us, and we started from a very basic state, is we had the strongest safety culture that I've ever encountered at any company. And so being able to connect the idea that security is related to safety and ultimately to the technicians or the end consumers of our technology, that made it such a more powerful thing, is that safety led the way. I think similar to how you're saying, compliance can lead the way in the same respect for institutions.
So we're going to move on and talk about AI security. And I can tell you that from every one of our webinars, at least that I've taken part in, AI and questions around AI are the most asked questions that is going on. And understandably, because it's new and it's developing. So the question, and I see this a lot, AI is moving fast inside financial organizations right now, while they're either building or buying and adopting. What are the security risks that come with adopting AI tools that most organizations are not thinking about yet?
So I think the things that I think about the most are twofold, and we can unpack that as much as we like. The first is there's been a trend, it continues to be a trend, that the consumerization of technology pulls technology into the workplace. That's been true. Laptops, iPhones, right? We all had Blackberries. We all ended up with iPhones because people knew that they were better devices. Macs are now common inside environments. The consumerization and the growth of things like ChatGPT, right? Still the largest, fastest growing SaaS service, I think, of all time. It makes people expect to be able to use it. And if you don't have good, hard controls that prevent it, it's happening. The integration of AI models and LLMs into search as just a basic capability of using the internet. It's happening. It's almost unavoidable that AI is going to make its way into the workplace. And so knowing where that is and having both the governance structure and the technical controls to back it up is, I think, a real challenge, right? It is a continuous pursuit kind of problem. The second thing is that most AI services want to take the persona and the identity of the user, right? They want to act as me when I log in. And in a lot of ways, that's great because you don't end up with these other accounts and you don't end up with things that can create problems later. But at the same time, I don't know that I want an AI acting as me with all of my entitlements. I want it to be able to act only in the way that I prefer. And so over provisioning of access, I think, is a really big problem. Hey, let me just sign in as global admin and connect this up and we'll just see how it goes. I think those two things present a significant amount of risk.
Even for a novice like myself, the over provisioning of access controls has led to a lot of problems that people are just now realizing it, and still happens daily, about not knowing that somebody's left an institution and cutting off their access altogether. And we read stories that people have still had access. But as we're talking about AI, one of the questions is, and from your perspective, if a bank is investing in and wanting to use one of the large language models that's out there, there's a lot of different ways people can buy it individually, and the bank may approve that. What are you seeing as the safest way? Is it like an enterprise account and being sure in the contract how that data is being used? What's your experience?
Yes, please get an enterprise agreement. I give a lot of credit to Google being the first that I'm aware of that came out strongly and took an enterprise-friendly approach, that they would not train on data and they would not allow access to data outside of your tenant. And so get an enterprise agreement. They have, I think, largely commoditized in the sense that you're going to get some of the same protections at all of the frontier providers. Use SSO, and often, right, getting SSO requires an enterprise agreement. The SSO integration, single sign-on integration, gives you that life cycling, right? That when you join an organization, it's easy to provision. When you leave an organization, it's easy to deprovision. And so that, I think, is table stakes to scale adoption of AI. I think the last thing is being really clear, and to the extent that you can, implement technical controls behind it about what can and can't make its way into the AI. And so, we have some hard lines that we use, particularly around PII, right? Ncontracts as a company doesn't collect PII, doesn't use PII in the bulk of our products. There's some very specific corner cases to that. But PII is not permitted to go into LLMs at Ncontracts, right? And so we take that very seriously. I would imagine that the same hard line would be really important at an institution. And so being really clear about that, and then to the extent that you can, enforce that technically so that you can be really clear about it.
So you're sitting right at at this great intersection, and here at Ncontracts as really an AI first company, and having tools, more of a suite of AI that's built into our tools, especially one like Inquiry. What did it take to secure those, or what does it take to secure those?
It takes a team effort. Building security into any product, and this is something that I've had the opportunity to do for the last 10 years across different types of products, right? Everything from industrial control systems to data products that had large corpuses of PII, to what we do at Ncontracts with supporting risk and compliance. All of that takes a team effort. It takes engineering, it takes product management, it takes legal, it takes privacy, it takes security, right? It's a team. There's no way that it gets done without a team. The cool thing about Inquiry, and I don't want to talk too much about our secret sauce, but the architecture is so brilliant. It uses ephemeral and stateless transactions that integrate with our LLM providers. And what's so great about that is that there's no history, there's no retention. It's a one shot, and it's very tightly controlled and tightly managed. And we screen for PII to make sure that if for some reason it was accidentally included, it doesn't make its way into an LLM. And so that architecture, and total credit to the engineering team and our CTO for getting behind this, makes so many problems go away. And it's brilliant. Now, on top of that, you got to do a lot of other things. And if you've studied AI at all, or if you've paid attention to kind of how people are scaling it, you have to evaluate the output of the AI over time, because models change, right? Models improve. And so being able to evaluate that on a continuous basis to look for drift, to look for bias, to look for inaccurate answers. That's really, really important. And so we've got a great team that does that and is actively paying attention to make sure we've got a truth set that is consistently being produced. And then my team has helped to supplement that with edge cases to look for, what if we asked it to do something it shouldn't do? How would it respond? What if we asked it to retrieve another client's data? How would it respond? We're doing those things that I think are now becoming table stakes to produce an AI product, to make them safe, to make them trustworthy, to make them reliable.
So, there's a lot of conversations right now about AI governance, and I think you touched on some key points. But from a security standpoint, what does responsible AI governance require? So I heard you say a team effort in terms of starting there. What else?
It takes patience, it takes thoroughness, and it takes commitment. Doing good AI governance is often not a ton of fun because it requires a lot of attention to detail. It requires being clear about where your hard lines are, and it requires really digging in on how things work. And as much as I would love to be able to use some of these really cool AI tools, they really don't have a place inside our environment. And so having the fortitude and the willpower to say, I love it too, and I use it at home, but it's not going to be done here. That's just not a thing that we can do. That has been a key part. Being able to put things in the lens of our clients and to say, like, I can't defend a choice to use this, or conversely, I can't defend a choice not to use this to our clients, to our shareholders. Like, being able to take that perspective, I think, helps a great deal, like anything. But in a space where there's so much pressure, I think that lens is increasingly important. The last thing I'll say, and it applies to our prior conversation as well about inquiry, everything is built on the foundation of good security. You can't earn the right to do advanced AI security techniques if you're not doing the basics, like patching your stuff, scanning your code, right? Being clear about process, good identity management, good hygiene. Like, without those things, you're going to focus on the shiny AI problem and miss the problem that's really going to get you burned. And so it all lives on a foundation of a good program. So in my view, like, you have to earn the right to focus on harder, more complex problems. And so that's something I'm proud of us for being able to do.
Well, again, that kind of transition where we start talking about kind of vendor security and setting the standard, because Ncontracts sits in an interesting position. We build vendor management tools when we're also a vendor that financial organizations trust us with their sensitive data. How do you think about that responsibility into your new role here?
I take it really seriously because I want us to be the best example. And that is a conversation I have with our executive team on a regular basis, that if we're going to advise and to provide content, knowledge as a service, be the experts in a space, we have to walk the line. And that's a privilege. That's something I learned at Nielsen, where Nielsen, if you're not familiar, right, has a lot of opinions about how it measures audiences. And that my CEO would say, it's a privilege to get this scrutiny, to have these expectations. And so I think about it very much the same here. Like, it's a privilege to be the standard setter and to be held to that example. And so is it easy? No. Right? It's a thing that does put pressure on us as an organization to perform, but it's pressure that I appreciate. It's a privilege to be able to do that. And so in every way that shows up, day to day, week to week, month to month, quarter to quarter, every client conversation I get to have a part in, like that's meaningful to me.
And for myself, I find that's extremely helpful because we are building it, but as we're building, we're also learning. So we're not just buying something and just kind of putting it to use. We're building it from the ground up. And I've certainly learned a lot in terms of what else we need to be looking for. So again, I think these things are helpful. So when you're evaluating other vendors here for us at Ncontracts, what are you looking for? And I think you've already touched that into earlier, but what specifics, what keys are you looking for?
I think this is where the 80-20 principle really applies. And so that's a thing that I am using continuously. What does the vendor do? What does it need access to? How important is it to our operations? What are the consequences if there is some kind of issue, availability wise or to some more greater extent? And so, balancing that 80-20 with effort, with friction, with precision is kind of the whole name of the game. And so I participate in a lot of those reviews. I have a great team behind me that does that work. But ultimately, right, I worry about like 10. There are 10, I think, that are on our critical list that are ones that we have to pay the most attention to. The rest, every vendor and partner is important, but the degree to which they'd impact our operations is just not material. And then out of those 10, I'm also a pragmatist. And probably half of those 10, nothing that I do is going to change how they operate. And so it becomes, how do I take into account, what they're doing as entities, as institutions? What do I need to do to compensate for that or fit that into my operations? What risks do I know I have to take? How do I mitigate those via a combination of administrative and technical controls?
Yeah. Yeah. So, from my vantage point and talking to CEOs and risk and compliance officers, in general, a very broad generalization is that these people see AI as a panacea. What really should be the focus beyond, okay, this is not just a panacea. What should be the immediate focus or questions that these people are asking about the AI model?
I think the biggest thing is, how tangibly is the AI going to help your business or institution succeed? And if it was really easy to do, everyone would be doing it and we would all know the answer. It is hard. It is a hard thing. And so being really intentional about what processes can be served by the implementation of AI, measuring the outcome, measuring that that outcome is sustainable over time, and how that results in a human augmented outcome as opposed to displacing human labor. I think that that's really, really important. And so I have yet to come across a fully autonomous AI system that's capable of displacing all the labor. And so I think it's really important to think about, how does it work in conjunction with our team in order to achieve whatever that outcome is, right? Whether it's serving our internal employees, customer service, client support, financial automation. There's tons of use cases, but I think being really clear about how you measure that, how you sustain that, and how you continue to drive quality in that, I think that's the key. And without taking that into account, it's kind of like the journey to cloud. A lot of people took their data centers and threw them in the cloud, and they paid more. They paid more for not necessarily a better outcome. And so the journey matters. And so that would be my big encouragement, is how do you measure the impact of introducing the technology?
And I would just go on to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, you can't measure the impact until you've defined the question, the problem you're trying to solve. And that's really what I kind of see as the problem with looking at it as a panacea. You've not looked at what is the actual problem you're trying to solve versus, oh, well, we can just get AI to build that, or we can use it for this. Is that a fair statement?
I think so. And this is where, I give a lot of credit to the European AI Act, which led the way in kind of framing a lot of these hard questions. And use cases matter. And clearly in that regulatory guidance, right, it's required to document those use cases. That's less the case, right, in the U.S. But people really sometimes don't want to pin down their use case. It's really squishy. Well, I kind of want to use this because it does that. It needs to be more specific. And so taking that little bit of time, kind of forcing yourself to write it down, forcing yourself to think about how to measure it, I think that's the key. And so as much as use cases and use case definition can be like not super fun, I think that's the key to really being clear about being able to measure the output.
As we begin to wrap up, what's one thing that most financial institutions could do tomorrow that would meaningfully reduce their security exposure?
So two things. The first I've mentioned already, and I'll just reiterate, which is know your network, know your environment. It's probably changed since the last time you went deep. And so take another spin through it, right? Talk to your engineering team, talk to your IT team, right? Go deep and have command of that, right? Is the first thing. The second thing is look at your own stack, and look at your own stack with a lot of scrutiny. I think it is, I've had this myself as well. You buy tools and you may not ever fully implement them. And so what you need to fix that problem is probably inside your own stack, and understanding, what that can bring to bear, how you can combine that with other things to achieve an outcome, right? A lot of that I think is at your fingertips. And I'll pair that with a last bonus one, which is understand your core business processes. because there's a lot of focus on phishing and business email compromise and financial impact from that. Most CFOs and their teams have a great process that are going to prevent that wire fraud from ever happening. And if it does happen, it's not going to be because your tool stopped it or didn't stop it. It's going to be because there was an improper implementation of the two-person rule. And so, those are things I think that just getting that context, being clear on what you have to work from, and understanding your business, that's 90% of the game.
Well, Clay, thanks for this information. If there's one thread that I really heard running through this conversation is it takes a team effort and to really understand this and build this correctly. And for everyone listening, whether you're a compliance officer or risk manager or sitting on the board of directors, the vendors you trust with your data are now part of your risk surface, not separate from them. And that's true of us. And it's true of every vendor that is on your list. And Clay was talking about using the 80-20 rule. We're looking at where the biggest risks are within your institution, understanding the Big Ten. The organizations that get ahead of this aren't waiting for a breach to ask the hard questions. They're asking them now. So if you think this conversation was useful, I encourage you to share it with somebody on your risk or compliance team or another institution. So thanks for listening to the Ncast. And until next time, stay proactive and stay engaged.